One day. Hello, how are you doing? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Dr. Will Show. I am your host, Dr. Will, and I am here with Tiffany Wycoff. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Happy to be
Excellent.
here.
Well, thank you. We are happy for you to be here. Uh, if people have not noticed, I've been doing a lot of podcasts on blended learning. My focus for the show will be on sort of going digital and teachers making that transition and how that sort of changed the culture within the school system. And when I came across your book, I said, okay, this is cool. And then I saw something on YouTube where Catlin was talking about, well, all three of you actually talked about the book. It was, I don't know, if it was a webinar or something. And
Sure.
I said, okay, there's something here. There's something here. And that's when I said, okay, I need to reach out and get you on the show and really talk to teachers, because one of the number one things of people who have my job is getting teachers to break out of the pencil and paper, I'm going to go make 1,000 copies a week
Sure.
mentality, even though they may have a classroom full of iPads or a classroom full of Chromebooks, PCs, it doesn't matter. So people, today we'll be talking blended learning in action with Tiffany Wycoff. So for those who are watching the show and they may, and just, I'm not gonna go there. Will you introduce yourself, Tiffany?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In case anybody hasn't seen the book, I'm going to hold up my fun copy of it right here. It grew out of a partnership between myself, Jason Green, and Catlin Tucker. I am a school leader and principal in New York City at the Mandel School, and I've been doing blended learning for a long time. I think before it was called, before I knew it was called at least blended learning, as a classroom teacher, and then later as a school leader. And I was in one of my moonlighting roles as someone who helps other schools make the transition to blended learning when I was when I met Catlin and Jason, and we realized, there's a lot of perspective that needs to be shared and taken into consideration when going through a transformation like this. And each of us felt like we had a different perspective to bring to people trying to really implement practical and sustainable change for blended learning.
Awesome, awesome. So let's begin by talking about shifting to a blended learning culture. What do you mean by a blended learning culture? What are some of the myths and misinformation about blended learning? And what are the essential must-haves of a digital classroom?
Well, I know that we talked recently, you and I, about it is about the technology a little bit. And that's true. When you think about blended learning, you do think about technology. But I think one of the myths that's out there is that that's the core piece of it and the end piece. And it's really about flexibility and opening up and connectivity within a school community, and also hopefully outside the school community for students to learn with other peers, and teachers to learn from each other and other teachers outside of their own school community in a really connected way. So I think that obviously technology is core, and when you're thinking about technology, you have to have some way of developing a tinkering discovery mindset with teachers, and that requires embracing fail forward moments and really celebrating them. Even celebrating innovation is part of developing a blended learning culture. When you can say, wow, that didn't really work out. I remember one time I was trying to use a new app to get my kids into learning space, and they were getting kicked out of it, and it was like we figured out it was 10 maximum. So those kind of moments are going to happen, and for teachers not to be afraid of that transition is important. And then, outside of that, I think you're really wanting to build a culture that is around personalization, not just for students, which we naturally think of, but also for professional development and teachers. Like, what does that look like if you could really have teachers experience the kind of personalized learning that you are hoping to open up through blended learning, and have real agency in the co-creation of what that learning looks like. It's really hard to tell teachers to develop this agency-minded co-creation learning experience in their classroom when when they're not having that experience themselves as learners. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Okay. So how does one begin to build the foundation of a blended learning culture? What goes into developing the vision, and how do you get teacher buy-in?
It's about alignment. I think the cohesion, and we talk about this, I think, in chapter 2 of the book, just about the process of engaging stakeholders. When you're doing vision work, the blended learning vision is going to be part of this greater school vision and the unique culture and outcomes that are specific to that school. And so usually, when we're talking to school leaders and we're hearing we want to do blended learning, it's not because blended learning in and of itself is this amazing vision of children, accessing resources. There's another thing behind that, and that's all around, maybe it's within your school. You want to develop skills for students to understand the path that they have to have between high school and college, to study in an asynchronous fashion and contribute to discussion boards and things that they're going to have to do in college that they might not know how to do yet. And that's part of the greater vision of the school and the blended learning vision. But the authentic engagement of stakeholders, and not just a few teachers, but understanding not just their teacher trailblazers, but really starting with what are the core values of the school, the challenges and the unique opportunities for the school. And having that conversation will lead to the vision of where the school is trying to go with a blended learning initiative, but also will yield what are the opportunities for the low-hanging fruit, which I think are really important to have the early successes that you want. People don't like to do things that they're going to feel like there's a long trudge before they get to a celebration. And so if I ask you, well, what's going really amazingly well in your classroom today? And then maybe there's an opportunity on the school level and the classroom level to find those quick victories through that work, and really establishing the pathway to the vision that you are going to, which may be really aspirational in its vision, but has to be iterative in my lights do this funny thing where they turn off, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to move, pardon me while I do the thing that I have to do and I move around in my office. So just a lot of that iterative planning around the vision with stakeholders. The other funny thing is that the part of this vision work, and if not the vision work, at least the implementation work, really should take into consideration the student stakeholders a lot more than I think usually happens. There's this assumption that we make around the way that students as digital natives must love technology, but they can have really fixed mindsets around what learning is. They've been conditioned to see it in one way, and some of them are quite good at it, and they can have a pretty significant who moved my cheese moment if they aren't engaged also in just getting buy-in around, like, I would love to have more agency and be part of the discussion about my learning. I'd love to connect with other students outside my school, and this is going to be important for me to have to do. And man, I'm going to be so prepared going into the workforce if I know how to collaborate online. But they're not going to make those transitions naturally.
Okay. So once schools have their vision and they know where they want to go from an instructional standpoint, teachers have to be trained. In your book, you say the guiding principle of blended learning professional development is CHUMP. What is CHUMP and how does leadership know if they're on the right track?
It means you chew up the teachers until they can't stand it anymore, and then they all feel awful. Now it's we really feel, we thought this is an easy way for people to remember that if you're going to take a pretty significant bite out of something, you have to do it with a lot of thought. And CHOMP, really, the first is an acronym. The first word is collaborate. How many times have you sat in a tech training or any kind of training and you're just not talking to anybody? And most of what we're trying to accomplish in a blended learning initiative is helping to teach collaboration skills. So the professional development around that should really involve collaboration, not just offline, but also online. And so there's this sense of connectivity and working with peers. The second thing is hands-on. Part of adult learning theory is really has to be imminently applicable to their daily practice. As adult learners, there isn't the notion that you just learn something for the sake of learning it. It might be inspiring for some, but when you're dealing with teachers who are just trying to solve real challenges in the classroom, having the professional development be, and I know on one of the more recent episodes of your show, you're talking very specifically about teachers building models like flipped classroom. You're learning about it, you're going to build it, you're going to try it out. That has to be a part of the component. And then the O is ongoing. I think one of the biggest challenges for professional development is how do you scale it in a way that can be hitting teachers when they need it. And the whole fire hose people in August and then sometime in the middle of the year, it just doesn't work because there's no capacity to absorb it or apply it in that moment. One of the things that I think there's potential in an open source manner is just the kind of learning that takes place in social media and professional learning networks now that can be ongoing, but teachers have to be taught how to do that and what chats to participate in. Then I also was part of a group that worked on the kind of blended professional learning experience that you could have with the professional learning platform that came out of Redbird, which was basically just a way to engage teachers and have them learn at their own pace in an asynchronous fashion, and then with some synchronous activity with each other. So the ongoing component is the O, and then we have the M for mindset. And this is a big one, and I think sometimes as administrators, it bothers us when there's an outlier so far away from the mindset shift where we need to go that we sometimes focus a lot on pulling those individuals in. But if you look at something like Gladwell's tipping point and that chasm that exists, you really are needing to get the and the ones that are just a little bit more conservative, but there's not a complete resistance to the idea, but just the idea of knowing where the teachers are starting. And if your mindset is one mode, what's the next logical thing that's going to be able to just feel, maybe slightly uncomfortable, but still within that zone of proximal development, and you don't feel like you're completely out of whack. And then if you can get a fair amount of your core middle that may be more conservative, some are more pragmatic, like I want to know what it's going to do for me. And then you have your trailblazers who can ignite everything. And they should be all dealt with in a different way when thinking about PD. And then that just brings us to the last one, which is P for personalized. Just knowing where teachers are and giving them agency to start where it makes sense for them. And not just the starting point, but also the mode of, having the same conversations around, well, what's the way that I might learn in a different way? I really don't like tech training. I'd rather just take the tool and figure it out. And then I'll go debug it through asking questions. but somebody else really wants to have that direct instruction first.
Tiffany does not want me to have a job, y'all.
I do. I really do.
Like, this is what I do for a living.
I know.
I want to throw a question out there for you because you brought up some salient points in your last response. Now, you're as a school leader, what do you do for or with a teacher who just flat out refuses to participate in this blended learning culture that you are trying to cultivate? They don't want to use the tools. They complain about, you want me to use this Schoology, or you want me to use this Canvas. The kids get distracted. I don't want them using the Chromebooks. They don't listen to me.
Right.
Or I have students of too many different levels. How am I supposed to teach them? Or I have behavioral problems. I can't give them independence on the computer. When they are telling you all of these things, and in your mind, a lot of you are saying, hey, blended learning will solve a lot of those, but how do you mentally sort of coach them up and break the ice and do it in a way that is beneficial, I guess, for the whole sort of situation? Because, I mean, as a leader, you have a job to do.
Right.
Which sort of, you need their participation, but your job also supersedes whether they are on board or not. The train is going to be moving. Mm-hmm. So how do you get them there when they just say, why are you looking at me?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. And I wish I could say I had 100% on that one, but you don't. Sometimes you don't get to 100% of that buy-in, but I think it's a people and understanding conversation. It's just like any other relationship. It has very little to do with technology and much more to do with self-identity, worth, and fear. And so if you can get to the underlying issue, like you said, there are all these explanations behind why someone is having a hard time buying into the initiative. And if you can understand the underlying issue, then you can focus on removing that challenge. And I have had a lot of teachers talk about for many, many years, how can we have X open, whether it was Facebook, which we wanted to use in high school for some discussion groups, and at my previous school, or where my middle school kids are on their Chromebooks and we have rotation stations, you can't see everything all the time. And the question of classroom management techniques, and it comes up, and challenges around that. So I'm, for example, not a fan of monitoring screens. I was very resistant to the idea of having kids putting some kind of monitoring software in place. But the discomfort was so high from some teachers around not being sure that the kids were engaged in learning, and having them look at YouTube or whatever. I mean, YouTube can be great, but it cannot be sometimes. That I said, okay, let's try to solve that challenge if it's going to get it out of the way. And so we looked into Go Guardian. It was a great solution for what we needed, and I was open-minded about it, and I said, let's just see how it goes. And none of the concerns and fears that I had came to fruition. It didn't feel like teachers were sitting there staring at a screen, waiting to see what kids were going to do. And in fact, the fact that they had it made it a little bit like they didn't even use it. They didn't even want it or need it anymore. They realized that. So I think being, as an administrator, willing to say, like, I might not be seeing this from the right perspective, and really trying to understand where the teacher is stuck can be that's really been the only way of getting around that. And then sometimes you just got to be a big cheerleader and build excitement around things. And so, just pumping people up and making them feel really good about the things that they are doing well, I think and say, you know what, this is almost exactly like it would look in this environment. I think this is a great place to start, and let's just do that for now, because sometimes it's just a little overwhelming. And so I'm going to go back to what you said about putting you out of a job, because I am in the minority of not appreciating as much having knowledge shared with me directly and a lot of times teachers really need that and they want that, and I'm assuming, oh yeah, just go try this out and play around with it, it'll be fine. And people don't feel comfortable with that. They want to be confident that they're not going to make a mistake that is a critical mistake to make. So it's really just a balance. And then sometimes I have had some difficult conversations with teachers around, if you're very uncomfortable in this environment, it's not going to get any more comfortable. So at some point there's just a fit problem, and you could be an outstanding teacher in X, Y, and Z environment, but this isn't the one that's going to make you happy every day. And so let's work on a different path and do that together as well. Because there's just sometimes there's a really big pedagogical disconnect, but not usually. Usually it's just something that's in the way in terms of fear or lack of understanding or frustration that I think is our job to get it out of the way as much as possible.
Okay. Okay. That little last few sentences, that I preach. It's one of those things that, because I don't have. I'm a big leadership junkie, as much as I like technology. And, Jim Collins has his book, From Good to Great.
Mm-hmm.
And he always talks about getting the right people on the bus.
Yeah.
And so I love that conversation, because that was a get the right people on the bus moment.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna go from here. But it's one of those things to where, I'm very excited about it, because we live in a world now in which the world is at everyone's fingertips. With the internet, they said the world is flat. I mean, you have kids here in Mississippi who can do projects, who can have these hangouts or Skype calls with kids in China. You have to work out the time zone difference, but you can have those discussions and have kids go, wow, you're like me, and learn from each other. I mean, we live in a time that I'm 43 that I truly never imagined would even happen. So I get very geeked when I talk to my teachers about technology. I talk, we can do this. What? So when someone says, I'm like, really?
What?
Really? You want to make 500 copies today?
I know.
So yeah, it's interesting. So I want to stay with. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say one thing about the bus comment, just because it's true. You got to get the right people on the bus. I think that's so true. But sometimes you don't have control over who's on your bus, and they're already there, and they're people, and they deserve to be, nurtured and personalized too, and everything else. And also says, and this is something I think about a lot when I'm stuck in these situations, it's the look in the mirror component. And the type of leader that you're aspiring to be is like looking when there's a success, you can look everywhere around you and see who had a hand in it. And when there's an issue, it's like, well, what can I do to get out of the way? So it's a balance. I don't want to come across as somebody mean who's kicking off people off my bus all the time.
No, I didn't take it that way, you know,
No,
and
I know.
I'm not in favor either of kicking them, you know, off the bus and
Yeah,
just leaving them there on the side of the road. No, I'm not.
yeah. It's
That's
about fit.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I would never do that. I'm just very excited because when people talk about 21st century learning, I always
Mhm.
go, what do you mean? We're knee deep in the 21st century. This is modern right now learning. This is not
Yeah.
some futuristic sort of thing we're talking about. So I always just, you know, I enjoy my job. I love what I do. And when I see teachers who are really doing it and kids are learning and teachers are excited about it and they're getting pumped and they're stopping me in the hallway and they're like, hey, let me show you what I'm doing. Come check this out. Oh, I want to do this. Can I do that? And I'm like, yes, let me show you.
Right.
Uh, those are the things that really fuel me and really feed me when I am having that day when a teacher is like,
Making
it ain't
copies.
happening. Yeah, it ain't happening. No, no. I don't know why you asking me because it ain't happening today. And I'm like, okay, all right. So those are the moments that really keep me anchored in the work that I do. So I want to stick with professional development because in your book, you talk about a blended learning toolbox.
Yeah.
Who decides which tools or instructional practices will go in the toolbox?
You know, it depends on what kind of tool we're talking about. So there are a couple in the toolbox. You have digital curriculum, and then you have some classroom tools, and you have some school tools, or you know that really for ease of collaboration and the kind of harmonious integration. You really want to make some decisions at a school level, and some decisions can be at a class level. No matter what level they're made at, I think that it's really important to have teacher and student sort of, this is where you can, you have tons of trailblazers, at least in a couple in every school, in every department, and you can tap into those and say, let's get a pre-pilot going. You know, we're thinking, I remember when Classroom first launched, we were on Schoology, we were thinking, should we switch? And try it out, and we're not we need to know, is it really user friendly? Are the kids going to like the environment? Does it look happy? Is it easy to figure out where to put things? Is it as robust of a tool? And so exploring, but then some things like productivity tools and like the G Suite environments versus Microsoft 365, you want to be making those at the school level with thought in terms of how they're going to interface with the current softwares that you might already have, or even the devices. You don't want to do like a Chromebook mashup with something that doesn't play nicely together. But then, you know, aside from that, the toolbox, I think the curricular toolbox is something that teachers can certainly hopefully have some agency over, or at least a department where you can think about what are the that we want to, you know, we're all trying to, whether we're offline or online, get beyond content, get beyond textbook, workbook, etc., and the more traditional tools. But I've seen teachers more readily able to make that switch as the first step. So if you're going to do something like a workbook replacement, there are a lot of options out there, and some of them are free and some of them are subscription. But making those decisions at a class or department level with some teachers and students inputs through pilots, I think is really a good move. For tools that are, let's engage the kids, and you know, we've got Padlet, let's just have the kids post on it and share their learning. I love it when teachers can find the tools that they will use at that level and implement them as it fits for them. Because you know, some teachers will want to do that, and you don't want a culture where teachers feel like they have to be told, this is exactly what's in your toolbox and that's all you can use. But at the same time, there are going to be teachers who feel much more comfortable saying, I don't want to have 15 different tools I'm trying to aggregate data from. I need to keep it simple. pick a few really robust, bang for your buck digital curriculum and communication productivity tools, and that's it. And start with that and use it until it feels really good and the kids understand their responsibilities in it. Parents also understand, and then you can start to explore a little bit more beyond that, because I think people just get overwhelmed with with just the sheer quantity of tools out there, and then they can miss things like responsible use and authorized consent. And I now work in a K-8 environment, and whenever I'm working with lower school and the kind of middle school teachers, that reminder around there's a responsibility in when you're setting up profiles for kids to make sure parents are aware and have consented to it. So you don't want a lot of that's out there, or to have kids going home and starting their own today's meet chat. Say, oh, I got it in school. So there's a responsibility factor. And I think teachers feel more comfortable with that when it's just a couple tools to really use consistently.
Are you still using Schoology?
We are using Schoology.
Yeah, we are we have adopted Schoology as our LMS, and
I love it.
Yes, I'm a Schoology ambassador as well.
Yep.
I always tell people that Google Classroom is cool if you're not going to do much, but if especially because here's the deal: when you talk about a teacher's classroom versus a school level culture blended learning environment, that's where Schoology gets you there.
Yeah.
Because everyone is connected. People are not connected in Google Classroom. It is one teacher on their own island. Where Schoology is everyone is connected. You can share resources, share all these things with your courses, invite people in. And what I love from an admin perspective is I can actually see what's going on.
Yeah.
And push stuff out. So if a teacher says, hey, can you get Nearpod into Schoology, or can you get Go Formative into Schoology? Can you do all these things? We can push them in there, and teachers go, okay, now I have my one-stop shop where I nor my students have to log in to 5 different sites throughout the day. We can kind of come in through here.
Yeah, I think that's a key reason why we've stayed, and it's integrated. The integration for us really works. And I feel like if you can get a lot of assessment power out of your LMS, a way to differentiate assigning and a way to have the kids doing assessment online and sharing in discussion and that are easily graded, and that kind of that lens that takes you across, you could upload standards into it. So it just had some key features that we felt were really important. But I think that's at the enterprise level. And if you're short on resources and Google Classroom is still a relatively new player in the space and has been adding to its features. But I think Google's motto of keeping it simple is going to remain consistent. But there's just the open, the ability for people to kind of get in and make code and put things in that it can be an add-on. I think you're going to see a lot more come out of that. But I am definitely a person who has to have the environment that I really love, and I think I'd have a really hard time moving from Google Apps or G Suite and into any other productivity environment. And I think it would be when I was a student and using Canvas as the LMS when I was doing my recent work at Columbia, I really didn't like that. So, and I think a lot of people are happy with Canvas. It has to be the right environment for the students. And I think that's why you got to get students on it, and they have to be able to use it with teachers and have some kind of input in terms of, because you don't want, if you have an environment that kids just hate and they don't even want to go to it, and it's like not connected to anything else, It's an island, and I mean, that could be pretty obstructive when you want to get them excited about learning and collaborating. If you're making them enter a space that just doesn't feel cozy and like a classroom. And the K-12 experience for kids is very different than the higher ed experience. And I worry that too much gets pushed down from big contracts, et cetera, to the K-12 level with things like an LMS. But, I think people really have to explore usability.
Excellent. So one of our biggest problems, and you alluded to it earlier about the digital curriculum, but one of our biggest issues that we have seen in our one-to-one is developing a digital curriculum. Teachers, especially, teachers in our district who they've taught 5, 10, 15 years, they have so many materials, so many resources on paper. I mean, my wife used to just have these tubs just sitting in the corner of all of this stuff.
Did you make her get rid of them?
You know what? When we moved and she got her Chromebooks, and she uses Google Classroom. She's a gifted teacher, or teacher of the gifted, I guess is the better term for it.
She's probably a gifted teacher too.
But when she started doing that and she started going digital, yeah, that went away. She just started giving it away to others, which I was glad. I'm like, why are we lugging around this stuff every time we move? So how do teachers approach creating a digital curriculum? How do they know? Because the internet is so open, how do they know what they find is credible and has the rigor that they need?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a really interesting topic to me because it's not unique to blended and digital learning. It's always been an issue of like, how do you get rid of this outdated kind of, but we're attached to it. It's our babies, our creative babies curriculum. And how do you know that what you're finding to replace it is really what you need and what is good? But it's because the complexity is that there's just so much out there. So I think there's part one, letting go. and that's you gotta be okay with looking at something that's old and outdated and saying, I gotta let this one thing go. And maybe it's not the whole bathtub and the baby concept. Maybe it's just, okay, let's look at this favorite project. When I talk with teachers, I'm like, what's a project you really love in your class, or a unit that you really love and you've been doing it this way and you love it so much? Taking it and saying, okay, there's value in that still. Like you get to own that. The kids love this every year. Okay, so let's look at it and see what are the opportunities. It might just be looking for that authentic audience piece. You can have a fabulous learning experience with this great project, and the kids are never sharing it outside of the classroom, and they're never learning anything about the topic outside of the classroom. So if you could just connect those two things, give them an authentic audience, a platform for sharing outside of their classroom space, and give them a way of learning from some resource, not necessarily just the internet, right? But like, let's get them connected with an expert and talk to somebody, or another classroom, find one other classroom to do this project with you. I think that, you make progress on that front. We talk in the book, we talk about digital curriculum in different categories. You have your kind of core tools in the classroom. And if you think of traditional curriculum, you're talking about your core textbooks, your supplemental materials, and then, your lectures, and, the instructional piece, and then the workbook replacement. And so when you think of those 4 categories, that doesn't even take into consideration all this cool connected learning project-based stuff. But when you're talking about, okay, I got to replace some curriculum with a digital tool, I think it's really easier to start with those things that are very familiar to teachers and say, okay, can we look for a workbook replacement? I mean, that's an easy switch, because you can't even differentiate when you're doing practice right? You're just saying, okay, you got to practice this, or you're making copies like your teachers. I'm going to make 5 different sheets for this 5 different groups. And it's a lot of work. So finding that as the entry point where there's real pain for the teacher on the planning end offline, and saying, you know what, I see you suffering. You have pain around this. Let me show you this one thing that's going to enhance your blended learning classroom, and it's going to give you better data, and is going to differentiate, it's going to adapt to where your learners are. And so to plan that part of it. And now you can go and you can focus planning on some of the cool things that are really inspiring to you. The things that I think are harder to replace is that instructional. Teachers are there some teachers that, I mean, I think back to my high school, and I got to tell you, my favorite teacher in the world was a gentleman named Mr. Kraft, and he talked the entire period every day. That's all that man did. He would talk, but he was so amazing and so knowledgeable, and I just loved him, and I learned all about the Kennedys from him and became a big conspiracy theorist. But me, and I don't want to take that totally from a teacher who really is good at that. So it's like, all right, well, then maybe you are the teacher that should be making a couple videos. Like, we had to capture this for a lot more people than just your students. If you can light the world on fire with your words, like, let's share them, and let's make it so that your kids can watch this stuff whenever they can and need to, and then you can do some real discussions and get people fired up, and you can do some really cool projects and do connected learning inside your class. So I think it's, again, what's out there in terms of lecture replacement requires a lot more trust in saying, okay, I'm going to go find this resource to teach my kids, but there's certainly a lot out there. And then, you can find the things that are easier to replace and actually, offer some pain relief. But I think one thing that I wanted to mention in the context of this conversation is that question about rigor and just how do you know it's really good stuff, or asking the kids to do enough that's challenging. And I do think there's a responsibility now that the teacher may not have as much responsibility to plan 5 different leveled assessments, because you can get an adaptive software to do that. But the responsibility of looking at curriculum materials and saying, well, what are the kids really being asked to do? And how rigorous is that? There's a great framework for, I know you were going to have, I think you said Eric Chenier was going to come on from ICLE, and they have a rigor relevance framework that's really great for just assessing, like, what are we asking kids to know, and what are we asking kids to do? And what you want to look at is, when you can't just pull in, oh, I've got this tool, this tool, this tool, and this tool. They might be all doing the same thing and never getting you beyond that practice mode. So you want to look at filling up the quadrants of, high rigor and high relevance is going to be your projects, and finding opportunities like global projects, which are now out there, that you can join instead of just doing, and you can share yours instead of just doing it within your own class. We had kids trying to figure out water shortage solutions. They had a classroom in India and a classroom in Connecticut, and our classroom, and they were just all talking about, what does it look like in your area, and how can you come up with a local solution to this global issue of water shortage and clean water access, actually. And they all, they were making different kinds of water filters and sharing them. So it's the same exact project that you might do just on your own, but it becomes so much more dynamic, and you build global perspective and a lot of other skills that you'd never see within your own classroom.
Awesome. This is a great show.
I'm glad. Didn't disappoint. Good.
I'm loving it. Before we go, I want your call to action for leadership. Who's looking to make the shift to a blended learning culture. What are some of the pitfalls they should avoid? The
pitfalls they should avoid. Okay. Number one, I'm going to say this in two ways, because I'm going to say what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and then what you can do, because I like to say things that, and both. I think avoiding unilateral decisions is just really important. Everything needs to be aligned, and for everything to be aligned, you'd have to have everyone's perspective. So really taking the time so what you should do is figure out where people are, get stakeholder input, and then make a plan, make decisions. And not all decisions have to be made at once. Number two, I'm not a big fan of big community announcements. Scary. And something like walking into school and saying, we're going blended and everyone's coming, I think can be a little bit jolting. As a leader, you can get really excited about something, and you just, when you're making announcements, it can be, we're going to try this out and this is going to be great, and it's similar to what you're already doing. So iterative change can have a big impact without causing people to get upset or fearful. And then the last thing I would say, give up knowing, give up knowing all the answers. Yeah, I hardly know anything. I feel like on most days, if I'm doing my job right, I always feel like I'm slightly on the edge of not knowing something really important. But I think taking the role of lead learner and being willing to say, like, I don't know, and empowering and trusting the teachers who you have, who are real trailblazers and can ignite innovation and spread ideas, is so much more powerful than having the answers. Because people generally don't want to hear from me. It's the top. They want to hear from from other teachers that know how to face the day like they do. And I think that can be a lot more powerful than positional.
Awesome. I have been there. I have honestly been in a meeting. This NWA guy came in and was talking to them, and he was like, "Hey, standard deviation is here. You should not be doing whole group all day. You need to be doing these groups." And I'm just sitting there going, like, "No, I know I said that just so many times," and they're just sitting there just eating it up, going, "Mm-hmm."
Yeah, it's so true. Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Like, so yeah. It's interesting. Again, I do love what I do, and my boss said she challenged Galeas, the other instructional technologist, to work ourselves out of a job.
Okay.
To work with the teachers to where the culture is set in a way where we're not necessarily needed. Now, I don't, I know he literally, he was like, don't, but
don't go anywhere.
But if teachers can take that ownership, and teachers can work together and share and teach each other, and then that culture is created in such a way to where it doesn't matter if this teacher retires or this teacher goes to another school or this teacher becomes an administrator. The culture of learning and sharing, connecting and growing together is such a part of that school that when other people come in, they'll just be brought into the fold because everyone is there. They're already there. And that's my mission, to get that going in our school.
I think that's a great mission, is developing institutional ownership, so that and inspiration, so that when you're not there, which you shouldn't go anywhere, people just they'll imagine you running down the hall saying, "I need to show you this." Yeah, it's good stuff. And it really does require a level of shared ownership that you can only get when you have people, and that just that culture of having your classroom doors open, just open them up and share with each other. And I mean, that's a whole other topic. It's just a shift away from this sort of observation and evaluation culture to share, learn, coach, it's a very different mindset that can be done parallel to, and should be done parallel to a blended culture, because you're really opening everything up.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks again for being a guest
Thank you.
on the show.
It was fun.
Hey, it was fun for me. I'm telling you,
Good.
I love these things, and it's interesting because I try to bring sort of these conversations to my teachers, and it's like cricket sometimes. Because when I talk about let's define this journey together, because for me it's all about the meta. I can teach you how to push buttons in no time, but that doesn't transform your practice. You have to define your own why and understand sort of how you fit into it and how your skills work into it and how your philosophies align with everything. So that takes inner work on their end that has absolutely nothing to do with me. But I try to have those discussions with them to sort of get them thinking about that.
Yeah. And it's the same question that got them thinking about teaching to begin with. It's like, why do you want to teach? Same question, you know, and I think asking that question, it almost leads to the answers inevitably. Nobody's going to sit there and say, well, I'd like to teach to really bore kids and have them all trapped in this one bracket of achievement. Nobody wants to do that. Everybody really wants to be connected. And we all went into this because we want to inspire kids to want to love to learn forever. And hopefully because we all love kids. You know.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks again for being a guest on the show. I want to have you back.
Okay.
Because this has been awesome. And I can't wait to share this on the show. Share this, but this is, I'll be talking to Eric in about 10 minutes. But outside of that, this is going up on LinkedIn. This is going to go on. It's going to be on YouTube, obviously. It's going up on my blog. I'm going to put this on SoundCloud as well. So when folks getting the workout on, they can listen to the show.
Thank goodness.
So as always, people, invest in you, eat you, peace.